The International Monetary Fund has scaled back its forecast for global growth this year because of supply chain shortages. Its prediction in July was 6%, but the outlook will be less optimistic when the fund's economic outlook is published next week. Prachi Mishra is an advisor to the IMF and co-authored a section of the report that deals with inflation.
In Chapter 2 of the World Economic Outlook, which we just published, we forecast higher inflation will likely continue in the coming months. And our forecast is that annual inflation in advanced economies will peak at 3.6% on average. And emerging markets, on the other hand, will see faster increases, reaching 6.8% on average in the final months of this year. But risks remain tilted to the upside for both advanced and emerging economies. And on the other hand, inflation is expected to revert to pre-pandemic levels by mid-2022. For advanced economy, on average, headline inflation will decline to around 2%, and for EMs to about 4%. But let me quickly stress two things that come out of our research. One is a key feature of the outlook is significant cross-country heterogeneity across advanced and emerging economies, and even within advanced economies. So while the United States is driving the strong inflation dynamics for the AEs in the short term, with near-term risks tilted to the upside, underlying inflation in the euro area and Japan actually remain quite weak. And the second point, let me emphasize that considerable uncertainty surrounds these forecasts, given the uncharted nature of the recovery we are in currently. So risks of an acceleration do remain. For example, sharply rising housing prices and prolonged input supply shortages in both advanced and developing economies, and continued food price pressures and currency depreciations in emerging markets could indeed keep inflation elevated for longer.
So what's really been driving these inflation surges? We've seen high gas prices, for example. How much of an impact are they having?
There have been three broad drivers of the increase in headline inflation rates we've seen since start of the year. First is the pickup in economic activity as economies recover from the deep contraction in 2020, or in economics terms, what we call closing output gaps. And it was indeed supported by accommodative fiscal and monetary policies, along with the release of pent-up demand and accumulated savings. The second reason, as you correctly pointed out, is rapidly rising commodity prices. And just to give you an example, global food prices are now up by more than 30% over past year, which is especially acute challenge for low-income countries where expenditures on food make up a big share of their consumer baskets. And the third reason is input shortages and supply chain disruptions. We don't actually go into the specific decomposition of the drivers. However, what we do in the chapter is some simulations where we look at the impact of continued strong increases in commodity prices and sectoral price shocks. And we do find that the peaks could be higher, and the return to trend could take longer than in the baseline forecast I just talked to you.
So do you think that central bankers are doing enough to fight these high inflation numbers that we're currently seeing?
Look, I think the good news for policymakers is that medium to long-term inflation expectations remain well anchored. But there's indeed disagreement about how enduring will expectations be. And a key concern is identifying the conditions that could cause recent inflation spikes to persist, leading to unanchored expectations or so-called self-fulfilling inflation spirals. And here, let me point out something that, look, ultimately central bank credibility and price expectations are very difficult to precisely define. And any complete assessment of anchoring can't be decided entirely based on relationships in historical data, which we are able to do.